Few films carry the weight of history the way this one does. Schindler's List didn't just tell a story, it became one, reshaping how the world remembers the Holocaust through the eyes of the most unlikely of heroes. But behind the finished film lies a series of hidden decisions, personal struggles, and creative risks that most audiences never knew existed. Secrets buried for years, some by design, others simply lost beneath the film's overwhelming legacy. And it all begins with the man who made it and almost didn't. Number 1. Spielberg almost walked away. For years, the project sat on a shelf, not because no one wanted to make it, but because the one person who felt most compelled to couldn't bring himself to start. Steven Spielberg first acquired the rights to Thomas Keneally's novel in 1982, but he repeatedly pulled back, privately admitting he wasn't emotionally prepared to take on a story of this weight and responsibility. He offered the director's chair to others. Roman Polanski, Martin Scorsese, and Billy Wilder were all considered at various points, each for different reasons. Polanski, himself a Holocaust survivor, ultimately felt too close to the material. Scorsese suggested Spielberg was the right person all along. For nearly a decade, the project stayed in a kind of quiet limbo, waiting for its director to catch up to it. What finally shifted wasn't inspiration, it was urgency. As Holocaust denial began gaining disturbing traction in public discourse during the late 1980s and early 1990s, the moral weight became impossible to ignore. Spielberg later described arriving on the Kraków set as one of the most overwhelming experiences of his career. A moment where he understood, perhaps for the first time, that this story had always been waiting for him to be ready. Some stories, it seems, choose their teller. Number 2. A rights deal few understand. The story of how this film came to exist is often told with dramatic embellishment, whispers of bidding wars, studio rivalries, and narrow escapes. The reality is more procedural, though no less interesting. Universal Pictures moved to secure the rights to Keneally's novel shortly after its 1982 publication, with Spielberg's involvement tied to the project from very early on. What complicated the path wasn't competition, but history. An older claim connected to MGM had to be resolved, the result of a shelved 1960s attempt to bring a version of the Schindler story to the screen long before Keneally's book even existed. That earlier project never moved forward, but the legal thread it left behind needed to be carefully untangled before Universal could fully proceed. Once the rights situation was clarified, the project formally settled at Universal, where it sat untouched for years, while Spielberg waited to feel ready. The lesson here isn't one of Hollywood drama, it's one of legal patience. The film's path to production was shaped not by studio politics, but by the quiet, deliberate work of clearing the ground before anything could be built. Without that patience, the project might never have reached the screen at all. Number 3. 2 films, 1 director. In the spring of 1993, Spielberg was doing something few filmmakers had attempted in quite the same way, directing 2 wildly different productions almost simultaneously. Schindler's List was shooting in Poland while Jurassic Park was deep in post-production back in the United States, and he was managing both from opposite sides of the world. The logistics were remarkable. Using satellite communication, he reviewed visual effects footage for Jurassic Park between shooting days on Schindler's List, sending notes to his team in California from a set that could hardly have felt more different. One film was a landmark technological spectacle. The other was a stripped-back, deeply personal portrait of suffering and human courage. The distance between those 2 worlds, creative, emotional, geographical, was vast. The emotional toll of that contrast was very real. Spielberg later recalled that after particularly brutal shooting days in Poland, he couldn't bring himself to watch dinosaurs on a screen. The tonal whiplash was simply too great. The experience left him changed in ways that went beyond filmmaking, and he has since spoken openly about Schindler's List as the film that finally made him confront his own identity as a Jewish man. Number 4. He threw away his playbook. Every major Spielberg production before this one had something in common. Meticulous preparation, elaborate storyboards, carefully designed shot lists, visual set pieces planned weeks in advance. It was how he worked, and it had served him well across some of the most commercially successful films in history. For this project, he threw all of it out. The decision was deliberate and deeply personal. He felt that his usual approach would create a kind of distance between the camera and the reality he was trying to capture. Instead, he gave cinematographer Janusz Kamiński the freedom to move fluidly, often shooting handheld, finding angles instinctively rather than from a pre-drawn diagram. The result was something that felt less like a traditional Hollywood production and more like discovered footage, raw, immediate, and unsettling. That rawness didn't happen by accident. It came from discipline and restraint. Spielberg resisted the instinct to compose beautiful images or let drama build to grand visual crescendos. He wanted the camera to behave like a witness, not a narrator. That single choice gave the film its distinct texture, separating it visually from virtually everything else in his filmography and making it feel, even decades later, like something urgent and unmediated. Number 5. The city that played itself. Finding a location that could credibly stand in for wartime Kraków was never going to be straightforward. Most European cities had been rebuilt, modernized, or simply altered beyond recognition in the decades since the Second World War. Kraków was a rare exception. Large sections of the city had survived with their pre-war architecture largely intact, making it one of the most historically preserved urban environments in Central Europe. Production designer Alan Starsky worked closely with the location team to identify streets, courtyards, and buildings that required minimal alteration. The Jewish quarter of Kazimierz in particular provided an extraordinary backdrop, its narrow lanes and aging facades needing little dressing to feel authentic to the early 1940s. Filming on location rather than a constructed backlot gave the production a grounded weight that no purpose-built set could replicate. For the cast and crew, working within those real spaces had a psychological effect that went far beyond aesthetics. Standing in streets where the events depicted had actually unfolded, or streets indistinguishable from those where they had, created a sense of responsibility that shaped both performances and creative decisions. Kraków wasn't just a backdrop. In many ways, it was a silent collaborator, one whose history spoke louder than any set dressing ever could. Number 6. A camp rebuilt from scratch. The original Płaszów campsite, located on the outskirts of Kraków, had changed dramatically in the decades since the war. What was once a place of immense suffering had been partially built over, altered, and reclaimed by nature, leaving almost no trace of what had stood there. Recreating it authentically on that ground was simply not possible. The production team made the decision to build a full-scale replica of the camp on a nearby hillside. Construction drew heavily on historical records, photographs, and survivor testimonies to ensure accuracy in layout, materials, and atmosphere. The scale of the undertaking was extraordinary. Not a suggestion of a camp, but a fully realized environment designed to feel oppressive from every angle and from every approach. The result was one of the most painstakingly researched sets in modern cinema history. Every detail, from the positioning of the guard towers to the texture of the ground underfoot, was considered against documented evidence. For the actors and crew working within it daily, the replica carried an emotional authenticity that transcended its constructed nature. It wasn't just a set, it was a deliberate act of historical witness, built so that what happened there could never be reduced to abstraction. Number 7. Laughter kept Spielberg going. Few people outside the production knew how deeply the filming was affecting its director. The subject matter was relentless, the locations were heavy with historical meaning, and Spielberg has spoken openly about crying before the camera rolled on many mornings. Something had to provide relief, and that something came from an unexpected source. Robin Williams, a close friend, took it upon himself to call Spielberg every week throughout the production. The calls were filled with improvised comedy, characters, and free-flowing humor, a deliberate effort to give Spielberg something to laugh about when the weight of the material threatened to become unbearable. Williams asked for nothing in return. He simply understood that his friend needed a lifeline, and he showed up for him without hesitation. The gesture speaks to something larger about the human cost of this production. Making a film about the Holocaust wasn't an abstract artistic exercise. It was an emotionally exhausting excavation. Spielberg has credited those calls as genuinely sustaining, a reminder that lightness and darkness can exist side by side without diminishing either. Williams' quiet generosity off-screen shaped the man behind the camera, and, by extension, what ultimately ended up on screen. Number 8. Why black and white mattered. Color was never seriously considered. From the earliest stages of development, the decision to shoot in black and white was central to Spielberg's vision, not as a stylistic flourish, but as a moral and artistic commitment. He believed that rendering this story in full color would risk making it visually seductive, turning something that demanded sober witness into something that could be consumed as spectacle. Black and white also connected the film to the visual grammar of history. Documentary footage, press photography, and archival images from the era existed almost entirely in monochrome, and grounding the film in that same aesthetic created an immediate sense that what audiences were watching was not a dramatization, but a record. Cinematographer Janusz Kamiński used light and shadow with extraordinary precision to deepen that effect, crafting images that felt simultaneously timeless and immediate. Universal Pictures was not initially enthusiastic. Studio executives expressed concern that audiences in the early 1990s would resist a black and white drama of this length and subject matter. Spielberg held firm, and the result justified every conversation. The absence of color didn't diminish the film. It amplified it, stripping away anything that might soften the reality being depicted and forcing the viewer to engage with it on its own uncompromising terms. Number 9. A survivor guided the film. The production had access to historical consultants, archival records, and extensive research materials, but one source of authenticity couldn't be found in any archive: the lived memory of someone who had been there. That presence came through producer Branko Lustig, who had survived both Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen as a child, carrying memories that no amount of research could replicate or replace. Lustig didn't simply oversee logistics. He walked the sets and spoke quietly about what felt right and what didn't, drawing on memories that no textbook could replicate. His input touched everything from the atmosphere of specific scenes to details of behavior and language. For the cast and crew, his presence gave the project a human accountability that went beyond any historical brief. There is a moment during the final sequence of the film where Lustig himself appears on screen, among the survivors placing stones on Schindler's grave. He later won the Academy Award for Best Picture alongside Spielberg, and his acceptance speech, in which he dedicated the award to his parents who did not survive, remains one of the most quietly devastating moments in Oscar history. Some contributions to a film can never be fully captured in a credit. Number 10. Auschwitz was off limits. The decision not to film inside Auschwitz wasn't a logistical one. It was a moral one. Permission might have been sought, the case could have been made for historical accuracy, but Spielberg and the production team concluded that using the actual site as a film set would be ethically indefensible. Auschwitz was not a location. It was a place of sacred and terrible memory that deserved something more than a film crew. Instead, scenes referencing or depicting the camp were recreated at carefully constructed sets elsewhere. The infamous gate, the processing areas, the interior spaces, all were rebuilt with documented accuracy, but on ground that didn't carry the weight of the original site. It was a distinction the filmmakers felt strongly about, and one that drew quiet respect from survivor communities. The decision also reflected a broader philosophy running through the entire production. There were things this film would not do, places it would not go, and lines it chose not to cross. Not because of what was legally permitted, but because of what was right. That sense of restraint, of choosing carefully what to show and what to honor through absence, is one of the least visible but most important aspects of how the film was made. Number 11. Not a star, but the right man. The role of Oskar Schindler demanded something specific: a man who could project charm, moral ambiguity, and quiet transformation without the audience ever quite being sure where his loyalties truly lay. That balance is extraordinarily difficult to strike, and it ruled out anyone whose existing screen persona would have overwhelmed the character before a single line was spoken. Liam Neeson was well regarded in theater and had appeared in notable film roles, but in 1992, he was not a household name in the way that many actors considered for major productions were. That was precisely the point. Spielberg wanted someone the audience would meet fresh, someone they could watch become Schindler rather than simply recognize. The absence of overwhelming fame was not a drawback, it was a casting requirement, and it shaped every conversation about who could actually carry the role. Neeson brought a physical presence and emotional restraint that served the role remarkably well. He conveyed Schindler's early opportunism without making him unlikable, and carried the character's gradual moral awakening with a subtlety that never tipped into sentimentality. The performance earned him an Academy Award nomination, and it remains the defining role of his career. Proof that sometimes the right choice is the one the industry least expects, and that the absence of star power can itself become a kind of strength. Number 12. The ring that meant everything. Among the film's most quietly powerful moments is the presentation of a ring, engraved with a line from the Talmud: "Whoever saves one life saves the world entire." It is the emotional centerpiece of the final act, and its meaning extends far beyond the scene in which it appears, reaching into the real history that surrounds the film and the people whose lives it represents. The ring was based on an actual gift presented to the real Oskar Schindler by the survivors he had protected. That historical detail gave the prop a weight that the script alone could not manufacture. The inscription it carries was chosen with care, functioning simultaneously as a moral statement, a summary of the film's entire argument, and a direct connection to the Jewish tradition at the heart of the story. What makes the moment devastating is Schindler's response, his sudden overwhelming recognition that he could have done more. Every possession he still holds becomes, in that instant, a life he failed to save. It is one of cinema's great emotional reversals, turning a scene of gratitude into one of grief. The ring doesn't just close the story. It opens a wound that the film leaves deliberately and honestly unhealed. That refusal to offer easy comfort is what makes the scene, and the film itself, so enduring. Number 13. One character, many real people. Itzhak Stern, as he appears in the film, is a calm and principled presence, Schindler's quiet moral conscience, the man who understands what is happening and works within it to save as many lives as possible. He feels specific and real, and in many ways, he is. But the character as written is not a direct portrait of a single individual. and understanding that distinction adds another layer to an already complex film. Stern was constructed as a composite, drawing on the lives and roles of several real people who worked alongside Schindler during the war. Among them was the historical Itzhak Stern, a genuine figure who knew Schindler and played a role in the rescue effort, but also others whose contributions were folded into the character to serve the story's structure. Screenwriter Steven Spielberg made these decisions carefully, compressing without distorting. The choice was both practical and narratively sound. A film of this length and scope couldn't give equal weight to every individual involved, and attempting to do so would have fractured the story's focus. By channeling multiple real people into one role, the film created a character substantial enough to stand beside Schindler without diminishing the truth of what each of those individuals actually did. Ben Kingsley's performance gave that composite a humanity that honored all of them with quiet, unwavering dignity. Number 14. The truth behind the list. The image of a single typed list, names on paper, lives hanging in the balance, is one of the most enduring symbols in the film. It has become shorthand for the entire story, a tidy emblem of rescue and moral courage. The historical reality, however, was considerably more complex, and the film itself nods toward that complexity, even if popular memory has simplified it into something neater than the truth. There was no single definitive list. Multiple versions were drawn up over time, revised and resubmitted through Nazi bureaucratic channels, with names added, removed, and renegotiated under conditions of extreme pressure and uncertainty. The process of getting a name onto the list involved a combination of Schindler's persistence, strategic maneuvering, bribery, and the cooperation of administrators whose motivations were rarely straightforward. Survival also depended on factors beyond the list itself: timing, physical condition, the behavior of individual guards, and elements of chance that no document could control. The film understands this, even if it must compress it for the screen. What the list represents is real: the extraordinary effort of one man operating within a brutal system to bend it, however imperfectly, toward life. But the full story behind those names is far more fragile and contingent than any single image can convey, and far more dependent on human courage than bureaucratic process. Number 15. A villain too real to watch. Creating a credible portrayal of Amon Guth, the commandant of the Płaszów camp and one of the most documented perpetrators of the Holocaust, was one of the production's most demanding challenges. The danger was twofold: too restrained, and the character would fail to convey the horror of what he represented; too theatrical, and he would become a caricature, allowing audiences the comfort of dismissing him as exceptional and therefore irrelevant to any broader understanding of human nature. Ralph Fiennes walked that line with disturbing precision. He gained significant weight for the role and studied historical footage and accounts to understand Guth's particular brand of casual, almost bureaucratic cruelty. The result was a performance that refused to place the character at a safe distance. Guth in the film is not a monster in a recognizable sense. He is something more unsettling, a man who caused immense suffering while maintaining the routines and appetites of an ordinary life. Survivors who saw the finished film reportedly described Fiennes' portrayal as deeply accurate in ways that went beyond physical resemblance. The performance earned him an Academy Award nomination, but its lasting impact is harder to quantify than any award. By refusing to make Guth comprehensible through the usual dramatic shortcuts, Fiennes created a portrayal that asks deeply uncomfortable questions, not just about one man, but about how ordinary human beings become capable of extraordinary harm. It is a performance that lingers long after the credits roll. Number 16. Designing for shades of gray. Shooting in black and white might seem to simplify the work of a costume and production design team. Without color, what is there to coordinate? In practice, the opposite was true. Every visual element on screen had to be conceived not for how it would appear to the naked eye, but for how it would translate into a specific shade of gray once captured on monochrome film. That required an entirely different kind of visual thinking. Costume designer Anna Biedrzyka Shepard worked closely with cinematographer Janusz Kamiński to understand how fabrics and tones would register on camera. Certain colors that appear visually distinct to the human eye can photograph as nearly identical shades of gray, collapsing important visual distinctions that the story depended on. Others would reflect light in ways that drew unintended attention. Every garment, every surface, every piece of set dressing had to be tested and adjusted against the specific conditions of the shoot. The result was a visual world of extraordinary precision, one that most viewers experience without ever consciously registering the craft behind it. The textures, contrasts, and tonal relationships on screen weren't accidents of monochrome photography. They were the outcome of months of deliberate planning. It is one of the most invisible forms of filmmaking excellence, and one of the most essential to why the film looks and feels exactly as it does. Every frame a carefully constructed illusion of spontaneity. Number 17. Schindler's charm was modeled. Oskar Schindler, as a historical figure, occupies a strange and fascinating position. A man of obvious moral failings who nonetheless saved over 1,000 lives through a combination of calculation, audacity, and something that may or may not have been genuine conscience. Translating that complexity into a coherent screen performance required more than instinct. It required a frame of reference that went beyond the script. Spielberg provided Liam Neeson with specific research materials to help shape the character's outward manner and social presence. Neeson studied the way Schindler moved through rooms, commanded attention, and used personal magnetism as a practical tool. A man who understood that charm was a form of currency and spent it strategically. The physicality of the performance, the ease with which Neeson's Schindler occupies every space he enters, reflects that preparation directly. The research gave the performance a grounded specificity that lifted it above generic heroism. Schindler in the film is never simply good. He is complicated, self-serving in many respects, and fully aware of the advantages he is working. That ambiguity, rather than undermining his eventual moral choices, makes them far more powerful. A flawless hero saves people because that is what heroes do. A man like Schindler saves people despite everything he is, and that is a far more interesting, far more human, and ultimately far more instructive story to tell. Number 18. Real survivors end the film. The final sequence of Schindler's List shifts registers in a way that almost no other moment in fiction film does. What begins as a dramatized scene, actors in period costume, a recreated grave, a choreographed farewell, quietly transforms into something altogether different. Real survivors of the Schindler transport, the actual people whose lives the preceding 3 hours have depicted, appear on screen alongside the actors who portrayed them. Each survivor walks forward and places a stone on Schindler's grave, a Jewish tradition of remembrance, accompanied in many cases by the actor who played them. The pairing is deliberate and quietly devastating. The film collapses the distance between representation and reality, between a story being told and the living people for whom it is not a story at all. It is one of the most powerful structural decisions in the entire production, and one that no amount of craft alone could have achieved. Spielberg has spoken about the sequence as the moment the film stops being a film. It was not included for emotional manipulation. It was included because it was true. The survivors were there. They were alive. And after 3 hours of depicting the systematic effort to erase their existence, allowing them to appear as themselves felt not like a creative choice, but like an obligation. Few endings in cinema carry that kind of weight, and fewer still earn it so completely, or so honestly. Number 19. The candle scene explained. The film opens not with action or dialogue, but with ritual. A Jewish family lighting Shabbat candles, reciting a blessing, the flame burning as the image slowly drains of color until only the candle's smoke remains, curling upward into a gray sky. It is a quiet, almost contemplative beginning for a film of this scale, and its meaning operates on several levels simultaneously, rewarding attention in ways that only become fully clear once the film is over. Spielberg conceived the opening as a threshold, a moment of transition from the living present of Jewish tradition into the historical past the film is about to enter. The candle flame represents life, memory, and continuity. Its gradual fading into monochrome is not an ending, but a passage, a visual signal that what follows is not merely history, but something that was once, and in some essential way still is, alive. The smoke rising at the close of the shot carries the weight of everything the film is about to address. The imagery also establishes the film's relationship with Jewish religious and cultural life before the events it depicts, grounding the story in something sacred and ongoing, rather than beginning with destruction. That choice matters enormously. By opening with a moment of observance rather than a moment of persecution, the film insists from its very first frames that what was lost was not simply population or property, but a living world. Everything that follows is measured against that opening image, and the film never lets the viewer forget it. Number 20. A score that felt impossible. There are assignments that even the most accomplished artists approach with genuine doubt, and this was one of them. John Williams, by 1993, one of the most celebrated film composers in history, told Spielberg directly that the film deserved a better composer, that he was not equal to the task of finding music for what he had just watched. Spielberg's response was characteristically direct. If Williams couldn't do it, nobody could. That exchange alone speaks to the emotional scale of what both men were confronting. Williams approached the score with unusual restraint, built around a solo violin melody that became the film's emotional signature. He chose Israeli violinist Itzhak to perform it, a decision that added cultural and personal resonance to the already deeply moving material. The melody doesn't comment on the action or amplify it in the way that conventional film scoring does. It mourns alongside it, maintaining a kind of dignified distance that mirrors the film's own visual approach. The score won Williams his 5th Academy Award, but its significance goes well beyond industry recognition. It is among the rare pieces of film music that exists as a meaningful work entirely independent of the images it accompanies. A composition that carries its full emotional weight even when heard in isolation. That quality is not accidental. It reflects the same commitment to authenticity and restraint that shaped every other creative decision on this production, and it ensures that the music, like the film itself, will endure long after the conversation around it has quieted. Number 21. The meaning of the red coat. In a film deliberately drained of color, a single exception cuts through the monochrome like a wound. A small child, in a red coat, moves through the chaos of the Kraków ghetto liquidation, visible, specific, and heartbreaking, before disappearing into the horror alongside everyone else. It is the film's most discussed visual choice, and its meaning is as precise as it is devastating. Spielberg used the red coat to represent something deeply human, the moment of recognition that comes too late. Schindler watches from a hillside as the liquidation unfolds below, and the child in red is the one figure his eye and ours can follow. She is not anonymous, she is seen, and the unbearable truth the scene conveys is that being seen was never enough to mean being saved. Awareness without action is its own kind of failure, and the red coat makes that failure impossible to look away from or to forget. It is a symbol aimed directly at the conscience of the viewer. The child was played by a young actress named Olivia Dabrowska, who was just 3 years old during filming. Spielberg reportedly asked her parents to keep her from seeing the film until she was older, a request that acknowledged the weight of what she had unknowingly participated in. She later appeared in a documentary about the film as an adult, reflecting on a role she had no conscious memory of playing. The red coat endures as one of cinema's most powerful symbols, not of hope, but of the devastating cost of indifference, and of how easily the world can watch while choosing not to act. Its image, once seen, is impossible to set aside. Number 22. The night millions watched together. Television had broadcast important films before, but few events in American broadcasting history carried the cultural weight of what happened on the night of February 23, 1997. NBC aired the film in its entirety, uncut, uninterrupted by commercials, and without the edits that typically accompanied network screenings of theatrical releases. It was a broadcast decision as much as a cultural statement, and the circumstances that made it possible were nearly as remarkable as the event itself. The decision to air without commercial breaks was supported by Ford Motor Company, which agreed to sponsor the broadcast solely in exchange for brief acknowledgments at the beginning and end. No interruptions, no product placements, no concessions to the usual rhythms of network television. It was an extraordinary arrangement, and it gave the film's nearly 3.5-hour running time the unbroken continuity it demanded. Audiences watched together in real time, without distraction, experiencing something closer to a collective act of remembrance than a conventional television evening. The broadcast drew an estimated audience of 65 million viewers, figures that placed it among the most watched television events of the decade. For many, it was their first encounter with the film, and the communal nature of the experience amplified its impact in ways that a theatrical or home viewing couldn't replicate. Politicians, educators, and community leaders responded publicly in the days that followed. For one night, a film became a shared national moment, proof that the right story, presented with the right degree of respect, can still stop a nation in its tracks, demand that it pay attention, and leave a mark that outlasts the broadcast itself. Number 23. Classrooms turned it into history. Long before streaming made film access effortless, getting a movie of this weight and seriousness in front of students required deliberate effort, and the people behind this production made that effort. Educational outreach began almost immediately after release, with organized screenings arranged for schools across the United States and eventually around the world. The Spielberg Foundation worked with educational organizations to fund free screenings specifically for students and teachers, recognizing that the film's power as a historical document exceeded its identity as entertainment. Study guides were developed, survivor speakers were paired with screenings where possible, and the film was positioned not as an optional cultural experience, but as a teachable record of events that demanded engagement. In some regions, it became required viewing for entire school districts and university courses, a classroom tool as much as a cinematic one. The impact of those efforts is genuinely difficult to measure, but their reach was broad. Generations of students encountered the Holocaust through this film before they encountered it through a textbook, and for many, the emotional immediacy of the cinematic experience created a foundation of understanding that more formal instruction could build upon. The film had always been made with a sense of responsibility to history. Its educational legacy is the fullest expression of that responsibility, reaching audiences the cinema itself could never have accessed alone. A film made for theaters ultimately found some of its most important and lasting work in classrooms, where it continues to open difficult and necessary conversations to this day. Number 24. The red coat was handcrafted. The red coat appears in only a handful of shots, but those shots required some of the most technically demanding work in the entire production. The assumption that the effect was achieved simply that scenes were shot in color and the color removed everywhere except the coat understates the complexity of what was actually involved. The reality was far more painstaking than it appeared on screen, and far more labor-intensive than most viewers have ever imagined. The scenes were indeed captured on color film stock in certain instances, but isolating the red of the coat while converting everything else to monochrome required a laborious process of rotoscoping, hand tracing the shape of the coat frame by frame, combined with careful compositing to integrate the result into the broader black and white image. Every movement, every partial obstruction, every moment where the coat passed behind another figure or into shadow required individual attention. The number of frames involved meant weeks of exacting technical work, carried out with a level of precision that the finished film never advertises. The effort was invisible by design. The red coat had to feel like a natural, almost subconscious element of the scene, something the viewer registers emotionally before they process it intellectually. Had the compositing been anything less than precise, the artifice would have broken the spell entirely. That it works as seamlessly as it does is a testament to the technical team's skill and dedication. Some of the film's most powerful moments were built one frame at a time, in rooms far removed from the camera, a reminder that great cinema is as much the product of quiet, painstaking craft as it is of inspiration, and that the most affecting images are often the ones that required the most invisible labor. Number 25. A film that built living memory. The film's legacy did not end when the credits rolled. In the years following its release, Spielberg channeled the proceeds and attention it generated into something with a longer horizon than any single production: the establishment of the USC Shoah Foundation, an organization dedicated to recording and preserving the testimony of Holocaust survivors and witnesses for generations that would never have the chance to meet them. The foundation's work began with urgency. The survivors who could speak were aging, and the window for capturing their testimonies in their own voices was narrowing. Thousands of interviews were recorded in the years immediately following the film's release, building an archive of first-person accounts that now numbers over 55,000 testimonies in more than 40 languages. These are not dramatic reconstructions or edited narratives. They are people speaking directly about what they witnessed and survived, in their own words, on their own terms. That distinction matters more than it is possible to fully express. What Spielberg built with the foundation addresses something no film, however powerful, can fully accomplish on its own. Cinema can create empathy and illuminate history, but it cannot replace the irreplaceable specificity of a human being describing their own experience in their own words. The archive ensures that when the last survivor is gone, their voice remains, not as a performance, not as a representation, but as testimony. It is perhaps the most important thing this film made possible, and the most enduring. A movie can move an audience for 3 hours. An archive can speak to the world for centuries, and in doing so, ensure that what happened is never reduced to something the world feels safe enough to forget. Few films have ever carried this much weight, or earned it so completely. Schindler's List was built on restraint, responsibility, and a refusal to make the comfortable choice at any turn. Every secret uncovered here points to the same truth, that what appears on screen was the result of countless deliberate decisions made by people who understood exactly what was at stake. From the director who almost walked away to the survivor who stood on set and remembered, every contribution was shaped by a sense of duty that went far beyond filmmaking. This was not a production chasing awards or commercial success. It was a group of people trying with everything they had to do justice to history. What makes it endure isn't spectacle or sentimentality, it's honesty. The black and white photography, the handheld camera, the real survivors appearing as themselves, the archive built in its wake, all of it reflects a single conviction that this story deserved to be told without compromise, and that telling it well was itself a form of obligation. Other films have tackled similar subject matter and fallen short not for lack of talent, but for lack of that same unflinching commitment. If this gave you a deeper appreciation for one of cinema's most important achievements, hit like and subscribe so you never miss another story like this one. And let us know in the comments, which of these secrets changed the way you see the film?